Hello, this is Angie Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical. Today's conversation is with my unofficial co-host and tarot comrade, Kyra Pauls. I think at this point she might not need an introduction because I keep inviting her back on. And I do that because we literally text each other a few times a week saying, hey, this thing happened. We should talk about it on the podcast. You know, I'm winging this podcast thing. And just to divert from Kyra for a moment, I just want to say that spoken word and podcasts and even radio way before podcasts even existed was such a vital part of my rearing and my education. And spoken word is just a huge part of what has made me me. I've did a few essays in the past couple episodes, and maybe that's not how this podcast should be used, but I feel like this is a perfect medium for someone like me. And I thank you for letting me use it to share my thoughts and my ideas, and also the thoughts and ideas of people I really admire and have come to love. I hope my creative approach to this gives you permission to play too. So let's get back to Kyra. Kyra and I both work with tarot for our own personal soul work. And then we also teach tarot and we do tarot readings for a living. And Kyra even uses it in her sessions with clients as a social worker and therapist. I mean, isn't she like the coolest therapist ever? I think so. So today we're like diving into tarot talk. But I think it far transcends the tarot because we're talking about archetypes. Kyra has training in archetypal analysis from a Jungian perspective. So it gives her this really unique experience and understanding of what we call the cards of the year. So I explain how we get to that point of figuring out what card is for what year, and it's all with numerology, but we're working with archetypes for the entire year. So we really talk about what does that mean and how do you come to that conclusion and how do you work with like the shadow and the light. So a little more about Kyra. Obviously, she's a social worker, a therapist, and a tarot reader. She's also certified as a shadow retrieval facilitator. Kyra is trained as a yoga teacher and a massage therapist. She's a practicing witch and a druid. And so this year, we were talking about the Emperor. We talked about it. I believe it was in June. I had an episode with her where we talked about the Emperor as the card of the year. And so we'll be talking about the Emperor today. We'll also be talking about the Hierophant, which is the card of 2021. We'll be kind of looking at the devil and we even talk about death, temperance, the devil, and the tower, some other cards of the year. And we talk about our personal cards of the year. In this episode, we do talk about politics. So, if you are done hearing about politics, maybe not the best episode for you. I mean, we don't go into the nitty-gritty detail or anything, but we do mention it. So you can find Kyra online at awintarot.com. So that's AWENTAROT.com. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Kyra Pauls. So let's start talking about what it means to work with an archetype or a card of the year. So one of the interesting things about the Rider-Waite is that the major arcana are only 21 cards, basically, because you don't use the Fool, do you, in archetype work?
No. Yeah. Well, I mean, so I'll use the Fool in archetype work, but not in regards to like a birth card or a year card or anything, since we can't. But yeah, I will work with it some.
Yeah.
It's more like, I mean, the Fool being like an archetype for like the authentic self, like the inner child.
Yeah, the divine child or whatever.
But yeah.
But there's no real like number that corresponds with it because it's a 0 and you can never really get to a 0.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know how to figure out your birth card or the card of the year, So if we're talking about the card, like, I guess the way I use it is I use a card of the year that is the same card for every single person on the world in the world who's following the Julian calendar, I guess. Is it the Julian or the yeah, it's Julian, I
I,
guess.
I think so.
Where you add it's all 2021, right?
Yeah.
Which is funny because we could use the Jewish year, or we could use another year. But if we use 2021, we basically take each digit of that number and add it together. And it works whether you do like 20 plus 21, then you would just get 41, and 4 plus 1 equals 5. Or you could do 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 1, and you still get 5. So it really doesn't matter how you add it up. You always get the same number. And then for your, do you do birth card too?
Yeah, I do birth cards too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so with birth card, you use your month plus the date of your birthday plus the year of your birth. That's your birth card.
Yeah.
And then if you're working with a personal card of the year, you add your birth month, birth date, and then the current year that you're working with. So just to get that out of the way.
Yeah. What's your birth card?
Strength.
Okay.
And yours is the Hierophant, right?
Yeah, Hierophant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the card of 2021.
Yeah.
But I really loved, we talked in June and you talked about the United States's birth card, and if we use July 4th, 1776.
Right.
And how this year was a tower year. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I'm like thinking, let me do that math.
It was 11 plus 4 is 15. No, devil year.
Oh, devil year. And so
next year is the tower.
Well, you know what? I mean, I don't know about you, but it kind of makes sense, because whenever I've experienced, like in my personal life, the progression of like the devil to the tower, like there's times that the tower is kind of like a big relief after what you knew was really toxic for a long time.
Absolutely. You have to like name it to tame it, right? And that's what the devil really does. It like shows you all the like grippy addictive behavior you have, like this non-healthy attachment. And what is more addictive than racism? It's like this country is completely addicted to racism, and we saw that in spades.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're addicted to like capitalism and money over people. What else are we addicted?
Well, and just how chained we are to the false notions that come along with it, like that people just in general as a whole believe. Like if you go to a random person on the street and you say, I think that not everyone should have to work, you're going to be looked at like you have 5 heads. It's like, of course everyone works. It's like, and we just blindly accept that it's like, oh, we have to work. That's how it is. You have to work, and that if you are not working, you are lazy, unproductive. And a waste of resources. So it's like, I mean, and thinking about just like how we get chained to those ideas and how that even impacts our own lives and like how we view ourselves too.
I know. I saw a little chart that had the amount of money all these countries were paying their people every month just because of COVID, so they wouldn't work. And it was like 1,800 a month in Ireland, It's just like it went down the line, and all these European Western countries, are paying people livable wages to help supplement what they've lost in, their job, just to get them through. And all these Americans were like, what is this? What are you talking about? Is this a one-time payment? They're like, no, this happens monthly. And it's because our country actually cares about us.
Exactly. Go figure. Yeah, and it's you know, it's just interesting to think about the devil card with that, like the beliefs that we just follow because we've been told, well, this is how it is, and so then we follow it and we don't even question that, like, maybe this is a chain that is oppressive that we don't really need to have
Right.
around our necks, but we're just, sitting here with it loosely around our neck because we think that it has some kind of power over us.
Right. It's kind of like the defund the police thing. Like when
Yeah.
you say that, people freak out. But then when you don't say defund the police and you say something like, do you realize the police, 80% of their calls are like mental illness that they have to deal with, and they're going in with a gun and a big bullhorn, and they're activating someone who's in a mentally unstable place. What if we sent people who are actually trained in mental illness to help talk to somebody and get them the counseling and help they need? People are like, oh yeah, that's great. It's like, yeah, exactly. Like, why do we
Right.
think this institution like is doing what we think it's doing? Like, they're not out there shooting bad guys and stopping robberies. They're actually shooting mentally ill people and poor people and black people because they have they can't discern, because they're not trained to discern as easily as, someone who's in the mental health field. So,
Right. Well, and I mean, and then there's even also like, I grew up in suburbia and I live in suburbia now, and it cracks me up when people who live in suburbia are talking about how much they like need the police, like we
yeah.
need the police, and it's like we literally operate in a completely non-policed way
Yeah.
all the time in suburbia.
Yes.
That's how we live. Like, it was rare that there would be a cop driving through and it would be just, officer friendly driving through and he'd wave to the kids or whatever. It's like, we are not policed. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure what you're thinking you're needing them to do. Um, because yeah, it's like the times that they sometimes are doing things, you're exactly right, it's like they're escalating situations that don't need to be escalated and potentially causing harm. And then there's times that, but most of the time we don't need them. And I know that there's a lot of times that we need them and we call them and they disinterestedly take your name and say they'll look into it,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I think that's like kind of too, the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that's bringing in this new age. We're
Absolutely.
also looking at all that too,
Yep.
which is cool. I'm like excited to see what's going to happen um, with in the next couple years. I feel like this has been one of those years that has forced us to look at all of our institutions. And
Yes.
so, I mean, that's not surprising because this year, 2020, has been like an emperor year, and the emperor has an interesting archetype. I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you see the emperor archetype?
Yeah, so
I'm gonna hold it up.
whenever I work with him with clients, like I kind of start off with like explaining him as the dad.
Yeah,
He's
he is.
daddy. And so it's like,
Big daddy.
he's daddy. And so you think about all the different like things that can mean. It's like I think about just all the associations with with fathers and fatherhood in general.
Yeah,
It's like in the overwhelmingly, I guess, positive sense, like he can be a really firm support
yeah,
and guide, and but then it's like, when does he become overbearing and authoritarian? And another thing too with the emperor that I pick up on a lot too is like even just like absent father
yep,
sort of stuff, like
yeah,
the tendency for fatherhood to be absent.
yeah,
um and I think like we've seen all of that in 2020, where it's like we have times where we have been controlled and abused and oppressed, And we've had times where we've been abandoned completely by
Mhm.
daddy, and we've had times that we've like just like we've been desperately seeking the healthy daddy who's going to like take care of all of this and make it okay again. And so we've all kind of had to learn as we've been like abandoned by daddy, it's like we have to like be our own daddy.
Yep.
It's like, okay, so if daddy's not going to say that I can't go outside because it's not safe, I'm going to say it's that I can't go outside because it's not safe.
Yeah. It's been it's so interesting to think of that metaphor through this year, and especially with like the president we've had, because like even when he's like up tweeting a storm, it's like such a
Mm.
bad dad
Bad
thing,
dad.
right? Where he's like so hyper vigilant on how he's perceived versus
Yes.
what he's actually doing to help people. And like
Yeah,
that is such the classic narcissistic parent where they only see
absolutely.
themselves in relation to how their children are performing for them.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it's been very interesting because that's, I guess that's part of what is important about when you work with the card of the year. You get the good, the bad, and the ugly of that archetype. You don't just work with the light aspects of it. You have to face and reckon with the shadow aspects of,
Mhm.
like it has felt so destabilizing this year. And
Yeah.
yet there's nothing more stabilizing than just being in your house all the time. So it's kind of been this weird push and pull. Like I feel like I've gotten a little more agoraphobic and a little more
Mhm.
like socially anxious, which I was already prone to do to begin with. But it's like I get a little nervous hanging out with people. I can only handle people at small increments. Like I'm not doing great with like being around a lot of energy.
Mhm.
Um, which is the other part of the emperor, which is that like massive stability thing. Where do you feel safe and all of that?
So I talk to clients a lot about we'll talk a lot about like Greek mythology and the different gods and goddesses as archetypes and everything. And we talk a lot about, like the battles between Ares and Zeus.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen a lot of that too, where it's like Zeus in Greek mythology is the daddy, but he's all about logic and reason, right? And then
Yeah.
you've got Ares, who's his least favorite son, um, who is angry and hot-headed and very hypersexual sometimes, and just all these things that like Zeus doesn't approve of. And so then Zeus like shames Ares by like using logic, like, well, you have to be logical. And Ares is just like, I feel so much in my body, right? Like, and so I think about that, and even just kind of what we see with rebellions in general. Like that's sort of what you see is that the rebels, whether they are socialists or fascists or whatever, if they're the rebels, they're the Aries archetype rebelling against dad. And so I was thinking about that, where how it's like we've had like Aries kind of in more than one way, where it's like we've seen Aries in the Black Lives Matter movement of, you have the police who have, the badge and the title and the jobs and whatever. And then you have people who are being stomped all over and they're being told that they're being too aggressive, that
Yeah.
they're too much. And so they're the Aries like rebelling against dad. But then on the other end, you have the Trump supporters and how, in a lot of ways, they're Aries rebelling against dad too.
Yeah.
And it's like we, as the left, keep trying to come at them with logic, thinking it's going to work.
Yeah. Which is, it's interesting that you said that with Trump supporters being Aries, because I really do think, like, within the structure of the right, they definitely are this, like, wayward child in some ways, the
They
one that wants
are.
to shake everything up. And, that's what happened this last 4 years, which is like we really realized, like, how polarized some of this thinking can be and how it's been. And so this, like, moderate conservative ideals just seem so old and fuddy-duddy in some
Mm-hmm.
ways, and same with the moderate left, they seem old and out of date too, and out of touch.
Well, and that's the problem, I think, is that it's like, people to the far right and people to the far left both agree that like shit's messed up.
Yeah.
And we keep on both sides for our various things keep being told what the rules are.
Yep.
And they keep thinking that that's going to work on any of us, and then we keep thinking that that's going to work on the right. And it's funny because it's like they're just like us in that sense, that it's like, I don't care what the rules are, I don't care what the rules have been, I don't feel good, make it better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is basically what they're crying out about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel good, make it better. Like, dad's supposed to make it better, but unfortunately dad is just shaming us for reacting to his emotional unavailability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, this president is, to me, he's like trickster archetype,
Oh God, yeah, he's got that mixed in where it's like he's got trickster too.
Yeah, he just wants to he's nothing of the
Well,
sort.
I mean, it's like I think that a lot of his supporters are, definitely embodying that Aries energy to some extent and then taking it to an inappropriate level, of course.
Yeah.
But I think with Trump, you're exactly right. I think that he's a trickster who knows how to play with that energy and provoke it and pull it
Yeah.
out of people.
Yeah, which is why the devil makes the most amount of sense right
It does. It does.
It's like,
And
let me tempt you with this easy fix of you feeling good about yourself. And
yeah.
so, what does he write this permission slip for? To like not have to be politically correct, not think about other people's feelings, not have to like, make any concessions. You get to live the way you used to, make America great again.
Mm-hmm.
Basically means going back to a time where your jobs were secure, whether you earn them or not.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say it, but
Right.
yeah. I mean, I
Right.
was going to ask you about the Aries influence here because the Emperor to me is such an Aries card. And yet Aries is kind of like the baby of the zodiac. It's the one
Yeah.
that, is screaming, which is, you know,
Yeah.
I just did a podcast of my essay about screaming and how vital I think it is. And
Yes.
babies are like, crying because they are screaming for justice. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be fed and I want to be held and I want to be loved and I want to be clean and I want to be warm. And they only cry because they don't feel unworthy of that. And I think Aries can be that, the kind of the town crier of the
Mm-hmm.
pulse of the community, the one screaming like, this isn't right. We all need to be fed and we all deserve that. So
Yeah. And as an Aries sun, I can say that has been my experience where it's been like, I'm always the one who's fussy and I'm always the one who's been picky and sensitive and this and that. And it's exactly right. Like you said, it's the town crier. I remember when I was told that I was the canary in the coal mine.
yeah.
And the thing is yeah, I think about that Aries archetype like that a lot, because for me, when I really let my Aries archetype out, it is the part of me that is very, very, very sensitive, very
Yeah.
physically sensitive. Because, like you said, it's a newborn baby, but you're right. It's the part of you that remembers your true essence and that remembers your inherent worth.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, at the same time, it's like I think about, other people like I have a, father-in-law who is an Aries
Yeah.
and who is very much a angry baby.
Yeah.
It's and yeah, you see that with Aries sometimes where it's like you do sometimes have the immature baby. And that's when I was younger and I would read about Aries sun all the time. That's what I would read and I'm like, I don't necessarily identify with this. I don't know that I'm selfish and self-absorbed in that sense that it's like, oh, it all needs to be about me. I'm just very, very sensitive. And that's what I found to be the case, is that even when an Aries is behaving badly, or that Aries archetype, like that energy in a person is behaving, quote, badly, that really it's just feeling very overwhelmed and very, very sensitive.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, I have 2 Aries babies, and
Yeah, so you know.
yeah, well, I just noticed my daughter, like, she's becoming very she has over the past 4 years, whatever, gotten really interested and read a lot about Black Lives Matter and, really, really interested in justice. And she really does that cancel culture thing, like, where she's just like, "This person once called somebody the N-word. I'm never listening to their stuff again. I'm never talking to them again." Like, she just, like,
That
cuts it
was
off.
100% me when I was her age. Yep.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
that's where I think, she's 13, so I'm not so worried about her being adult level mature, like that's part of the growing she needs to do. Like at some
Mhm.
point we realize that like all our heroes did something that we really hate, and they've also have good stuff. And you know, it's just been interesting to watch how that Aries comes out where, I think, yeah, okay, I get it. Like, I wanna do that sometimes too, and I love that sometimes Aries writes the permission slip for you to just be like, "Fuck that, I'm not you're
Mhm.
out. You're
Well,
out,
and
Karen."
I think that that's really important, because it's like, I know that for me as an Aries child, there were a lot of times when I was told, "You're very judgmental. You're so harsh. You're so critical." But the thing is that I was a very, very, very passive person in general. And so what happened is, when people repeatedly told me that I was being judgmental and critical, I was like, oh, maybe you're right, over time. And so then I started, associating with people who took advantage of the fact that I was very sensitive and easily overwhelmed, and
Yep.
could use that to their advantage, when before, in a way, me playing around with those very critical Aries mindsets was actually a really important part of me developing some of my inner strength and ability to discern, because I otherwise had more of a challenge with that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a funny thing, my children are like that too, like, people would never think they were Aries because 'cause they're so quiet and
Yes.
introverted. They would
Yes.
never, like I don't think you would look at them and immediately pick out that they're Aries children, but when they loosen up, you can hear it, you can hear
Yes.
the fight. And I love that spirit. That is like what gets me going. I'm always like, you guys are going to change the world, like my generation sucks, you guys are rock, like you're
I
going to
know, they're
change
so
everything.
much better.
It's so funny. I saw a great meme that was like kids in this generation, and it had like a picture of them screaming at the cops, like, you know saying all this stuff about, defund the police to the cop's face. And then the next panel was like, "Can you go up to the counter and order my coffee for me, mom?" Like, I don't want to
That's
talk to another person.
hilarious. That's
And I'm like, that's exactly how my children are. They're like,
I
they would rather not buy a coffee for their, or like a hot chocolate than have to ask somebody for a hot chocolate.
That is so funny. I can relate to that so
Yeah.
much. Oh my gosh.
It's funny, like this year as an quote unquote emperor year, like I didn't realize what the like relationship with authority was going to be, because just to kind of go back, it's like when you were talking about the absent daddy, like that to me has been the most important part, was like
Oh
the
my
lack
gosh,
the
yeah.
lack of authority,
Yes.
and how much I
Right.
wanted someone to lead and not just like
Yeah.
be passive. Because I guess I always thought like, yeah, less government is better. And then, and then it comes up to it and I'm like, where are our leaders? What is happening here?
Well, and I
Um,
think that's really the problem, is that people always talk about it as like more or less government. It's like, I mean, you're a parent. Are you like more or less of a parent? It's like, no, you are the right
yeah,
kind of parent. You
exactly.
parent where you need to parent, and you ease up where you don't need to.
Exactly. And I'm
It's
not a
not more
conservative.
or
I don't
less.
I know conservatives are usually like, less government. But, I tend to like think the best of
You
people.
tend to think that like Big Brother is not something we want.
Right.
Right.
Yes,
Like, yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
And it's not, I don't want
Right.
that. I want an effective
Right. It's like
government.
I want a father who will make sure that my basic needs are taken care of, and make sure that this pandemic is controlled, but who will not then also take it upon himself to read my text messages.
Yes.
And like, that's not a more or less, it's a be like, that's what being a parent is knowing
Yeah.
that, like, I guide and I support and I provide, but I don't control and restrict and spy on.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's actually like so hard to walk sometimes because
Oh yeah.
well, I mean,
Yeah,
you always think
absolutely.
like before I became a parent, I was like, I would never do this and that. But it's just so easy when they go to sleep at 9 o'clock to like, oh, I'll just pick up their phone and read what they're doing. And I don't do that, but it's tempting. Like when
Oh
other
yeah.
parents
Oh
do it, I'm
yeah.
like, I get why you do that. I just if I start that relationship with my kids, that's the relationship I get with my kids.
Exactly.
And I don't really want that, but
Well,
it's
yeah,
a lot of
then
unwinding because, literally you'll just see like Good Morning America talk about how you should be doing that, and it's just hard. So
yeah. Well, and that I find just wild. I mean, I remember when I would go to the Children's Resource Center at my old work, and we were going for forensic interviews and stuff with kids. That would come up a lot because there would be a lot of cases, with adolescents and teens who maybe, met up with someone that they met, and then an assault happened, or even just other various things with kids at school, and the parents would say about wanting to read their kids' messages and all this stuff. And um, I would say it was kind of interesting because generally the police that I worked with took the vantage point of not so much, but there was one in particular that, like, the way that he would talk about it was really, really good. And it was just like, your child has gone through something traumatic, and what your child does not need right now is to feel like that they did something bad,
yeah, exactly.
and that they're being punished. And I think that that's just a good rule in general. It's like, like you said, like, it's like, that's the relationship you have. Is the relationship you have one of like, oh, my kid can't trust me, and you know, I am invasive and
Yeah.
control my child, and my child feels like they need to then hide things from me, because that's going to be the automatic response. I mean, all kids are doing stuff that mom and dad wouldn't want them to be doing. It's
Yeah.
just kind of
Um it's kind of interesting because then we move from like the emperor year into a hierophant year, and there that also is a
he
kind of a
does not like Playboy.
no, he does not approve. And he's just definitely got like a different kind of authority, but still dealing with authority, I
Well,
would say.
he's like the authority's authority.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much
Yeah.
going on. I mean, they even look the same, like in the way they're seated and presented. But there's so much more going on with the Hierophant than the Emperor. Mainly because he's not alone, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, the Hierophant has the two friars or whatever.
Yeah, the Winter
kneeling in
Rose,
front of him.
the lily, and the 2 keys, and
Hmm.
the path forward.
I was gonna say, I mean, it's funny because I mean, the Hierophant is like I think most tarot readers' least favorite.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that in a forum or something. It was like they had a bunch of people vote on their not like least favorite as far as interpreting, but least favorite as far as just least favorite.
Yeah,
And everyone like I mean the winner, not everyone chose, but the winner was the Hierophant.
for sure.
Um, but he's like one of my favorites because like he's my birth card and it's just like Aries because it's like when I was a kid and I was an Aries sun, I was like, I don't know how this relates to me at all. I don't like it. And so then I had to like find more out about it. And then I
Yeah.
started to like it. And the same thing happened to me with the Hierophant too, where initially I was like, oh, bummer.
Yeah.
Darn it, I got this guy. But he's grown on me.
I like him too. You know, I once had a reading with Mary Beth Bonfiglio, and the Hierophant was like in my you now. And she was like, oh, the Hierophant, you're so lucky you've got the Hierophant. She just kept going and gushing about the Hierophant being the spiritual channel and like basically the intermediary between God and people. And she kept saying, like,
Exactly.
that's you. And
Hmm.
I never really thought of it that way because the Pope, like having been raised Catholic, the Pope was always like untouchable and so far away. And I think that's why people probably don't relate to it very well because they think of him as so far removed from their experience and their lived life, you know,
Hmm.
like he's the person you go through. But what if you are the Pope? Like, what if
Well,
you're the
yeah,
one?
and I mean that's the thing. I mean, like he gets, really associated with like, dogmatic teachings and things like that. But you're right, like you like as your like job, like your role is a hierophant.
Yeah.
Like that's what you do.
Hmm. Yeah.
I should put that on your IRS forms.
I know. I never know what to write there.
Yeah, just put a hierophant.
Oh my God, that's so great.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like he's when I tell clients that, who have that birth card that, he's not just the Pope, he's also the advocate or the attorney. He's also the counselor or therapist or the teacher or the spiritual leader, just in general. Like he's all these different archetypes potentially.
Yeah. I'm writing down notes because I love this. Like, I love thinking about him in different ways.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I always think of him as the institution, you know, like whatever that is, marriage,
Hmm.
the school, the hospital, the institution, like the government. And that's why I find myself like, ugh, it's about
Right. Yeah.
institutions, you know.
Right.
But then when I reverse him and when I get the Hierophant reversed, I see the Bohemian, you know. I see the one that flips all of that on its head, and you know, it's the polyamorous couple, and it's or triad, or you know, thruple, or whatever you want. It's always
Yeah.
that bohemian artistic, like spiritual mystic
Yes.
idea, and I love the reversed Hierophant. I just
Yes.
maybe because I relate to it more.
Well, and it's interesting because in numerology, I mean, that is what the number five is like,
Yeah.
the number five is definitely like a very kind of shamanistic number. And it's a mystic and bohemian and, the one who can't settle down. And I know for me, when, I first went to a numerologist and they were talking about me being a number five, that they're saying that like number fives have like extremely sensitive nervous systems. And so that's why they're associated a lot with drugs, is because, you gotta float
Wow.
away somewhere else to medicate away because fives and especially 14 fives, which is what I am, like that they're very sensitive. So it makes sense that temperance then is also associated with it,
Yeah, that's really
because
interesting.
five is a lot about overdoing. And a lot of times they overdo because they're so sensitive that they just can't get enough.
They can't
Um,
help but overdo.
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't know that. Like, I mean, of course I knew that connection with temperance and Hierophant, but I love that. I've been thinking about temperance a lot.
I know, and we like don't like that card, right?
I know, but
I
then, but
because
then
you're like, it's like be
recently,
moderate.
yeah, recently I laid all the cards out, and I'm gonna do this. I laid all the cards out, and I was like, okay, so we have death, and then we have temperance, and then we have the devil. And I kind of was like, okay, so you die and you get this like pleasant place that says,
Mhm.
hey, like the angel greets you and
Yeah.
shows you the light, like shows you the path forward. And then this is the temptation of like the temptation of Christ, which is, hey,
Ah,
you can just have a normal life, right?
yeah,
That
yeah.
was the temptation of Jesus, which is like, you don't have to be the savior. You get to just have a normal life, married and have some
Oof,
kids and blah, 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 blah. That's
oof,
what the devil did, right? So
oof.
I started thinking about this, like, instead of it going like 13, 14, 15, what if it's like 13 and the two paths are the path of, you know, the easy connect, like
Oh my
attachment,
God,
or
I
the hard.
love this.
I know. It just kind of like,
Yes.
like I can offer you this path towards the light and you just have to give it all up. You have to give up all your attachments. You have to like give up all of your beautiful anger and humanness and the suffering. And the devil's like, but it really feels good when you have sex.
Right, right, right.
And you're like, wait, hold on. It does feel good when I have sex. But anyway, that's why like it changed my feeling about temperance a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, that really does. Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that. Huh. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm like still like on it. I just like can't like come
Well,
away
it's
from it
funny because,
yet.
like, well, you and I have been studying the tarot for a really effing long
Right.
time.
And then it's like
And so, like, when you have a new revelation, you're like, what?
you're like, holy shit.
How did that happen? But then going back to the Hierophant, like, this is a dude,
He's a
Like, the
dude.
Hierophant is a guy, which is funny because I had a really small tarot class with my friend Caroline and with David. And these two, I'm just going to use their names. I won't use their full names, but David was like, this is not a man. This is a woman in drag. Like, this is a woman pretending to be. Like, he just could not get over how feminine the Hierophant looked. And then conversely,
Actually you're right.
yeah.
I've thought that.
And then conversely, he was like, and Justice is not a woman. That is definitely a man.
Hmm.
And so David's queer, and he was like talking about like, why don't we talk about like the gender bending that happens in these cards, like the
Right.
Hierophant and Justice, where they're both shown as like asexual,
Right.
but we think that, oh, it's the Pope, it has to be a man, you know
Hmm.
and it's
Well,
Justice, it
yeah.
has to be a woman. But
And I mean, the Hierophant has been associated in some decks with like, like Carnunos and like these other
yeah,
things. And I was thinking about that with well, you have the 5 and the 11. And I mean, 11, of course, is a spiritual number, but I'm just thinking about that with the ties with those to shamanism,
yeah,
and the um, gender bending or absence of gender that happens there. So yeah, it's really interesting that you say about like those two cards, because yeah, well, and even I mean, even temperance is very
yeah, very
like
feminine.
what um you know, it would be like, this is, well, whenever I talk about the temperance angel, I talk about them in a gender neutral way. Or I think maybe sometimes I have used him or her, but I've switched back and forth. I think I've used every gender descriptor you possibly could and none
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
temperance angel. And you're right. I mean, I think with justice too, and then now even looking more at the Hierophant, like I've thought that, but yeah, this is interesting.
It's really interesting that you said that you refer to temperance in gender neutral terms, because I tend to genderize everything, like every character here. And like, why not use gender neutral terms for those gender, like androgynous?
Yeah, temperance and justice in particular, I usually talk in like kind of a neutral way. Or like I said, sometimes I'll switch back and forth because I know there's been times where I've said him for justice, and I know there's been times where I've said her for justice.
Yeah. I
And
should just use
I didn't
they.
realize I was doing it. But yeah, and I know that I've used they to, so but yeah, it's like, yeah.
It's just so heteronormative. I mean, like, hate to say it that way, but like, I'm so used to genderizing things and being like default to he or whatever. Like, if anything, this generation is teaching us is like things are non binary. And we, to
Right.
continually, you know, categorize them in binary ways just takes away from it. If I don't know what the gender is, maybe I should just default to gender neutral,
Right.
you know? It's kind of interesting. Because does it really matter if the Pope is a male or female? I mean, I guess for Catholics it does.
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, I will say with him, I've always figured that he is a man just because he's the Pope. But without that, yeah, I mean, who's to say? And right, exactly, does it matter? Like I think in the Rider Waite, I don't know.
I mean, it's
I
part of
assumed it
the
was a dude because it's a Catholic church and that's the only option, or or whatever.
exactly. And
But
the whole point of, you know, the man taking a vow of chastity is that he overcomes his basest desires so that he isn't like, wanting to have sex. And obviously we know that turns on itself and causes all kinds of horrible, horrible repercussions when
right,
you swallow your sexuality. But I mean, the idea here is like his sexuality is actually there and he is overcoming it to serve God better,
hmm,
like the sacrifice of that is important sacrifice, right?
right, right,
But we
right.
don't kind of get that idea with the high priestess as much. Huh. I wonder how that will play out. Like the Hierophant, the sexuality that's underneath it all for the Hierophant.
I don't know. Yeah.
There's a saint, Saint Marina, and she was like young and something happened. I forget, like, I don't know if she was getting persecuted because she was Christian. So she ran to like a monastery and pretended to be a male because she was like young and still hadn't developed. And she pretended to be a boy for her whole life. And then when she was in her 20s or 30s, one of the local girls got pregnant and accused Marina of being the father. And of course,
Hmm.
that's like immediate expulsion from the monastery.
Hmm.
And so Marina got kicked out of the monastery and continued to pretend to be a male and raised the child as her own. And no one ever found out until Marina died that she was a woman.
Oh my God.
And that's what made her a saint, was that
Oh my
she just
God.
never gave up that girl's like secret that she could never have impregnated her. They never had sex, obviously, because the wife never knew, or whatever. I think they abandoned the child with him, well, her, and So there is some interesting gender bending
Wow, I love
sainthood.
that. I love that.
Yeah, I love that saint story.
So interesting. Huh.
So what do you think 2021 is going to be like when we work with the Hierophant?
I don't know. I mean, when I think of the Hierophant, I mean, I think of him as like, okay, King Arthur is the emperor and
Mhm.
Merlin is the Hierophant. And so it's, he's the one who like teaches Arthur
Yeah.
how to be a king and um helps guide him and helps him remember like what's important and like the whole purpose behind it all. And so I'm hoping that maybe we'll see some of that where it's like, okay, we've had a lot of focus on like the problems with the structures as they are. Maybe it'll be bringing up more questions as to why they are the way they are.
Yeah.
I think might be more of the focus where it's like, okay, we've seen what the problems are. Now why is it like that? And what, like maybe there's a Hierophant energy that has a different way to guide
Yeah.
us.
I know. Like when I think of it, I think of like authority with grace. And I mean grace in like that traditional sense of like some spirit with it. Not just
Yeah,
like,
there's soul.
yeah, with a little soul.
Yeah, like okay, yes, we're, going to get things back in order or whatever, and that's going to look however it's going to look, but hopefully maybe this time there's a greater purpose in mind with
Yeah.
how we're doing it. Like it's not just about control, it's about why do we need to control that? Do we need to? Why do we need to do things like this? Do we need to do it like that?
Yeah.
Um, well, and even, I mean, the Hierophant, um, as much as he can be about like dogmatic teachings, I mean, sometimes he can even be about that energy of what we were talking about earlier, where you're saying about your daughter and cancel culture. I saw that a lot with me, with my own Hierophant energy when I was young, but I saw it as Hierophant energy, where it was like I was very set on that my political views were correct, and I still am. But I was set on they are correct, and I am not going to bend to anyone.
Yeah.
I'm right, period. And so, it's like that was kind of the attitude. And so you think about that. I mean, at some point I did have to acknowledge, like, how is that really so different from a dogmatic, Christian or Catholic Hierophant or a more conservative one? In some ways we mirror each other. In some ways, mine is a rebellion against, but then it comes around full circle again,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's like I see that energy with the Hierophant too, where it's like, um, you know, I think he can always have that tendency towards being dogmatic, but if it's the type of dogmatic that we like, maybe it's more okay. I don't know.
It's interesting. I mean, I
Because
struggle
like,
with that too because it's like they wouldn't be my political beliefs if I didn't think they were correct. So that's what I struggle with.
but it's
Where
like sometimes
people are
like
like,
I just think like, that really like that energy of the Hierophant that, almost could be oppressive if taken the wrong way. It could also be like helpful where it's like, no, you know what? We all need to care about each other. We're doing universal health care and I don't care what you say about it. We're doing it.
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
right thing to do, period. And you can scream and yell all you want. I'm doing it, period. That would be a
wouldn't that be so
Hierophant,
awesome?
right? Like,
Will you
but that would
please
be
run for
him,
office?
right? Right. It would just be that I'm right, you're wrong. End of
Yeah,
story. And it's like, well, who's that sound like?
yeah, I know. No. I mean, I'm hoping like we feel the path forward is at least filled with like I love that he's looking at two different paths, like the one monk and the other monk, because I feel
Yeah.
like maybe that means that we'll have at least some peace between the two sides, you know.
I love that. Yeah, that like, they can maybe both come together, and even though they have other sides, that like, maybe they can come and kneel before the same Hierophant at least for a little bit.
Yeah. Which is like how it should have been this year, which is who is the real leader in this country? It's like the people, you know, because we're supposedly quote unquote a democracy.
Well, yeah, and I love how like what you said about the Hierophant, that he's like the soul to leadership, and so like he's kind of just like an energy, and so like just thinking about like the different sides is like the different energies deciding to come before the same energy of like, oh yeah, that's right, the point of our leadership, the point of having leadership at all is to make sure that people are taken care of, and that hasn't happened. And the Hierophant is definitely the type to be like, you all need to be a little more generous, you need to be good to each other, like those are some of his teachings too.
Right, the golden
um
rule.
yeah, like the golden rule, period, like that's his whole thing. So
And like
maybe we'll
yeah.
see some of that.
And the Hierophant, like in connection with the tower, if we think about like America's card of the year, right? Because once we
Yeah,
move from the devil, we're moving into the tower now. So we're bringing down those institutions.
yeah,
And it'll be interesting to see how the Hierophant, like, is the light, the beacon of light, you know, in that taking down of institutions we didn't think could be taken down. So I don't
yeah.
know. I'm hopeful. I am actually hopeful for 2021 because 2020 was such a shit show. Like, you really couldn't predict anything that
Hmm.
was happening.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, and I mean, I do kind of feel like, I mean, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of Lord of the Rings, the part where, do you know Lord of the Rings
Yeah.
much? Yeah, okay. So like the part where um King Theoden is possessed by Saruman the wizard. So it's a king who's possessed by the wizard, and then Gandalf shows up, and Gandalf has now been given the role of the White Wizard, which is, that's the wizard possessing the king,
Yeah.
but Gandalf just got a promotion, and the other wizard hadn't been given the heads up yet that he's not the White Wizard anymore, but Gandalf is. Um, so Gandalf was showing up to let the other guy know that he had been fired and that I'm now in your job. But he shows up, and it's like you have like this emperor that's so sick and twisted and
Yep.
possessed by an evil force, so to speak, and diseased and plagued, right?
Yeah.
And then Gandalf the Hierophant shows up and like pulls the disease out of him, pulls the wizard out of him, and banishes him because he shows up as like, no, actually, I'm the real Hierophant. And so it's like, I was thinking about that with like the election, how people are like saying about it. It's like bringing up daddy issues. It's like, who's our real daddy? Oh no. And it's like,
Yeah.
we keep looking to daddy, but it's like, we need to be looking to the Hierophant.
Yeah.
Like, I think that that's who we're really looking for, is that Hierophant.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because he's the one that, even when the emperor is failing and sick, he's the one who shows up to be like, no, no, we're putting an end to this. Like, this isn't
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
So, what's your card this year that you're working with?
Let's see. 2021 is 5. So 4 plus 8, 12, 3.
Star.
I'm onto the star. Yeah, I had a tower.
You had a tower year last year.
Yeah.
I had one of those a couple of years ago.
Yep. It's definitely been a tower year.
Yeah. I'm moving from a hermit year, which is interesting, to, I guess, a Wheel of Fortune or a magician year, whichever I want.
Well, both are, yeah.
Positive.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the idea of moving from the hermit to the magician, but
I do too. I like that. I like that because it's like he found that light
power
on the inside.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
boom, became the magician.
Just hope I don't turn into an arrogant asshole, but
I mean, I hope you do a little bit. Like, I think you could use a little bit of it. Don't you?
I don't know.
Like, you could use
bitch.
you could use a couple like shots of that like magician narcissism.
Yeah.
You could.
I don't know. I put myself out there enough to be narcissistic.
I just think you could stand to use it. It could be a good thing for you.
Yeah. I'll take that. I will take it.
Yeah.
Plus, like, I want to wear the robe and have a snake.
Right. Absolutely.
Maybe that's like what I'll do is get a snake. We're like, oh, here's my snake.
Oh, that would be so cool.
Well, thank you for talking. This is so awesome, as always.
Yeah. It was.
And so 2021 will, I'm sure, talk much more. So
yeah, absolutely. We will.
Thank you.
We will.
Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie@themoonandstone.com.